The last lab class is when we have our last lab practical, and it really is just on what we've had since the last one. So really it's with the brain is where it starts. Okay? So we'll have the brain, we'll have the spinal cord, spinal nerve, spinal tracts, and the special senses material that we're going to talk about today. So that's what is on it. Okay, let me get my markers. And so today we're going to start with the eye. And if you will, in your lab book, it's exercise 23. And if you've got the former version, like, with the diagram on the cover, it's page, actually 360 is what I want to refer to first. And if you have the new one, it has the pole vaulter, well, that's page 362, even though it didn't bother the number on the page. All right, so, now, the eye. All right, as we note there in that figure 23.1, where it's looking at the external anatomy of the eye, the thing that we want to point out is the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is essentially a mucous membrane that covers the anterior of the eye. Okay? And if you ever have inflammation of that, it's called, of course, conjunctivitis. And the most infamous type of conjunctivitis is what is called pink eye. So I don't know how many of you have ever experienced that. It's most unpleasant. Will not ask for a show of hands or anything of that sort. All right, so there you go. Now, if you then go to the next page, which is either 361 or 363, we have there a diagram showing the extrinsic eye muscles. And of course, the extrinsic eye muscles are the ones on the outside of the eye that move the eye and turn the eye. And we have a model here, and I'll talk a little bit about this and we'll pass this around and you can each take a look at it. So if we take a look at these, there are actually 6 of these extrinsic eye muscles. All right, now 4 of them have the name rectus as part of the name. And remember now what rectus means when it's in the name of a muscle? Straight. All right, so we have, for example, a superior rectus muscle, all right? And that one is right there on top, if you will, the superior border of the eye. And if you pull on that, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to elevate the eye, and it turns it then medially. So kind of like slightly toward the nose, if you will. That's the superior rectus. All right, now, if you go then below the eye, down on the inferior border, there is an inferior rectus muscle, all right? And it's just exactly the opposite position from the superior rectus. Superior is on top, inferior on the bottom. All right, so if you contract that inferior rectus muscle, what does it do? It depresses the eye. You look down. It'll also move it slightly off medially. All right, so off towards your nose, so to speak. Now, a lateral rectus, well, that would be like this one on the model. It's right here on the side, if you will, the lateral. All right, and that one moves the eye laterally. So if you're looking out that way, that's laterally. That's the lateral rectus muscle is the one that you're using. And then opposite it is the medial rectus muscle, all right, which is right, hard to see on the model unless we pass it around, which we will here in a bit. And that one is, of course, and closest to the nose, if you will, the medial side, and it moves the eye medially. So we have, as I said, superior rectus, inferior rectus, lateral rectus, medial rectus. Now, we also have a couple of obliques. And these are going to move things at an angle. So there is a superior oblique muscle, and the superior oblique muscle is back in here. and it moves the eye, really not like you might think. It actually depresses it and moves it laterally. Okay? And then there's an inferior oblique, which is down here. It looks sort of like it wraps around, slightly around the eye. That one will actually elevate the eye and move it laterally. So those are the 6 extrinsic eye muscles. And we'll say a little bit more about those when we get to cranial nerves, because there are several nerves that control them, and that's there, but we'll chat more about that in lecture. So you can pass that around and take a look at that, showing those 6 external or extrinsic eye muscles. Now, there are also going to be what we'll call intrinsic eye muscles that are inside the eye, and they're going to be involved with things like the amount of light that's coming in or out, so they take care of adjusting the size of the pupil, and they also help in focusing the lens on objects that are either near or far. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the figure 23.3, and in the older book, I think it's page 362, and in the newer one, I think it's 365 is where you'll find it. And it's a cross-sectional model then of the eye. And for that, we have a couple of models that we can pass around, and we'll sort of take a look at these here as we go. And I'm going to snort this one to point out some things as I'm yakking away. All right, so let's take a look at that. We have there like a cross-section or sagittal, basically, section of the eye. All right, and so if we start there on the very anterior side, what do we find? The window on the world, the clear part called the cornea. And really what that cornea is, it's a stack of epithelial cells. It's a stack of epithelial cells, but in life they are very clear. Now, one thing you're going to notice when we go to our sheep eyes, and we're going to be dissecting sheep eyes, they're a little bit smaller than cow eyes, but that's all right. They've got all the goods to them. The cornea is going to be very opaque. It's going to be very clouded. Well, that happens, when the death and demise of someone occurs. All right, but in any event, there it is. And to be honest, even though we call them contact lenses, they're not lenses at all. They really are what you could think of as an artificial cornea, because how they correct your vision is they alter the shape, the curvature, if you will, of the cornea. That's how they correct your vision. All right, so there we go. And of course, the ones that we now have are either those flexible ones that you can leave in for ages and ages, or the gas permeable ones that are harder. But the original ones were not gas permeable, and you could really only wear the things for a couple of hours a day, because the oxygen coming to these cells gets there through the air, through the atmosphere, not through the blood. And so when you wore those things for a few hours and then you popped them out, your eyes were proud to say, "Oh, we can breathe again." I mean, you couldn't believe the feeling. But anyhow, there you go. All right, so there we have the cornea. Now, something else that you will notice there at the base of the cornea is something called the scleral venous sinus. Now, what is that? Well, that is an opening for... hit the thing with my knee. It's right in the right place to do that. It'll stop buzzing here in a bit. All right, thank heavens for small mercies. Sounds almost like, well, fire alarm's even louder, but anyway. Now, that is there to allow fluid, and we're talking here about aqueous humor to drain out, and I want to mention it now because sometimes it's easy to forget. All right, and if that becomes blocked, that can lead to an accumulation of that aqueous humor, which is a watery fluid in the anterior segment of the eye, and that can lead to glaucoma. Glaucoma is the increase in pressure in the eye. Well, if you have too much aqueous humor, that's how you get it. All right, and so if that scleral venous sinus becomes blocked or occluded, that can lead to glaucoma. Now, anterior segment. Anterior segment is the area between the cornea and the iris. And that is, in essence, filled with a watery fluid called aqueous humor. And that aqueous humor is constantly being produced, reabsorbed, and allowed to drain out through that sclerovenous sinus. All right, and that anterior chamber extends now on the other side, really, of the iris as well, the iris being the colored part of the eye. So immediately behind the iris and in front of the lens, that's also part of that anterior segment, and that's also filled with that watery aqueous humor. All right, so the iris, colored part of the eye. Wonder what is responsible for the coloring. What was responsible for the pigment that colors your hair and your skin and all that stuff? Starts with an M. Melanin. Well, there you go. All right, brown eyes have more melanin than blue eyes, and so on down the line. All right, simple enough. All right, and then the opening through the iris is, of course, the pupil. And, of course, the pupil is the way we have to control the amount of light entering the eye. So it will dilate to let in more light or constrict to let in less light. So if I open up my little model here, here we have, in essence, that anterior segment of the eye. There's the cornea, there's the iris, the pupil being the opening in it. All right? And then, immediately posterior to that would be the lens. All right? And the lens is also like a stack of epithelial cells that are normally clear to allow light through and to focus light on the retina. And of course, if this becomes clouded or opaque, that's what we call a cataract. So a cataract is really a clouding of the lens. And of course, these days, that's very commonly rectified by simply removing the lens and putting in an implanted lens to take its place. In the olden days, there were no implant lenses. They just simply took out the clouded lens, and then in order to be able to see, the individual had to wear glasses that had very thick lenses in them. Commonly called them Coke bottle bottom lenses. But that was back in the days when Coke came in glass bottles, and they had very thick bottoms in them. Well, I remember one of my grandfather's sisters had cataract surgery. This was back in the 50s, really, because I'm old, you know. Well, as I recall, for each eye, she'd be in the hospital for at least a week. After surgery, her head was between sandbags, so you couldn't move a muscle. And then you wore these horrible thick glasses. And the thing is, when she went to bed at night, she had to remember where she put them. She had this particular place on her nightstand where she put them, because she couldn't see a thing without them. And the other thing, too, you really couldn't just turn your eyes, like that to see something. You actually had to turn your head, as I recall. So you were always looking through the center of the corrective lenses. So things have come a long way, I guess you could say. All right, now that's simple enough, isn't it? Now some other tidbits. All right, you find there the ciliary body. All right, on the model, here it is. It's this sort of pleated-looking black material that you find here. That would be the ciliary body. Now, there are two things there. Inside of that are ciliary muscles, and those muscles are there to control the amount of light coming in and the focus on the lens. All right, so it can either constrict and let the lens get fat and bulky, or thin it out when they relax, and so that controls whether you're looking at things near or far. Holding the lens in place are some little ligaments they're just connective tissue fibers, called the ciliary zonule. And the ciliary zonule are the fibers that all actually hold the lens, and they also enable, the lens to either constrict or relax, depending on what the ciliary muscles are doing. Now, in the eyes, when we dissect them, you'll be able to find the ciliary body. You're not going to see the muscles, but occasionally you can find the ciliary zonules, because sometimes when you take out the lens, they come with it. Sometimes they don't. It seemed like when we were doing these the other day, majority of the lenses actually came out clean, but but at least there were a few in every class that also have the ciliary zonules attached to them, so we can see that. All right, now there we are. So when we are anterior to the lens, we're in that anterior segment, and that's the area, remember, that's filled with the aqueous humor. Now, when you go posterior to the lens, you're in the posterior segment, and that is going to be filled with another liquidy type material called vitreous humor. Now, the vitreous humor in life is more the consistency of egg white. All right, so it has more protein in it. It's a little thicker material. In death, what will happen is that stuff basically gels. So when you open up the eye, you'll find that the vitreous humor comes out kind of like, looking like, how should we put it? I can't say I ever saw Jell-O that looked quite like that. It's more like the consistency of thick, viscous snot, to put it mildly. I mean, that's probably a vulgar term. But anyway, there you go. All right, now, it's very important because it really fills out the eye, and it really helps give the eye its proper shape. All right? Now, when it comes to the coverings on the eye, we've already talked about the cornea, of course. But what about the other coats, or tunics, as we can call them? Well, the outermost, which is really just a thick layer of dense fibrous connective tissue, that's called the sclera. And, so if you hear someone talking about the white of the eye, they're talking about the sclera. All right, now, that one's thick, it's pretty tough. That you're going to have to puncture through it in order to cut into the eye. I'll show you how to do it when we get to the eyes. All right, then the next layer underneath of that, and we're going inside the eye now, is something called the choroid. Now, the choroid is going to be black, and I'll bet you couldn't guess in a million years what the main pigment in it is. Melanin, right. And the choroid is there to really absorb light, so you don't get reflections in the eye. Now, if you flip over to page 365 in the older version of the book, or page 367 in the newer version, you can see there a dissected cow's eye. And if you look there at the posterior portion, you can see the black part of the choroid. Now, cows, sheep, other animals have something on top of the choroid that we don't have. You see that blue-green area. Well, that blue-green thing that you're seeing there is something called the tapetum lucidum. And you'll see that where it says retina, and you find the caption, the last two words that appear there in the parentheses, tapetum lucidum. That always makes a nice thing to ask on the last lab practical, so please make sure you make note of it now. All right, now what's that for? Now we don't have it. We don't have that. But you've always noticed, I know, when you're driving along at night and the kitty cat is crossing the road, what do you notice? It's eyes, all right? Same thing with lots of other animals, all right? That's because that tapetum lucidum is reflecting light. And the whole purpose of having it is to enhance their low light vision, okay? It reflects light and it enhances low light vision. Now, we don't have it, so we're not as good in low light conditions as a lot of other animals are. But then remember, cats are nocturnal creatures like raccoons and so on, They like to be out at night. hunting, foraging, if you will, whatever. Although they're carnivores, so anyway. Now, then, the innermost layer, the innermost coat, sometimes called the nervous coat, is the retina. And the retina is, of course, where you're going to find the photoreceptors that provide vision. Now, on the retina, there are two kinds of cells, and they are cones and rods. All right, the cones are for color vision. They're also for sharper vision as well. And the reason for that, compared to the rods, which are monochrome, for monochrome vision, and also low light, because remember now, when you're looking at something low light, it's not really brilliant color, right? All right, and also things like peripheral vision, that's largely going to be due to those rods. Now, every cone has a nerve fiber connection to it. So every cone is going to send out an impulse through the optic nerve to the vision center, the visual cortex in the brain. Rods don't do that. They're in clusters, all right? So you may have several rods supplying impulses to a single nerve fiber. You know, it's kind of like a highly pixelated photograph, right? You know, because what makes things sharper are the more pixels that make them up. Well, you know, you don't have as many pixels, shall we say, in the areas of the rods. Now, where on earth in here do we find these things? Well, back on the back of the eye, on the retina, there's an area where we have the sharpest vision, and that is what is called the fovea centralis. And the fovea centralis is a little indented area. It has the highest density of cones of anywhere in the eye, and that is typically the focal point for the object that you are observing. So in other words, the lens is trying to focus the image right on that fovea centralis for central vision. And as you move away from the fovea centralis, you have fewer cones and more rods. Now, the area of the sharpest vision, and that is the fovea centralis, but you also have fairly sharp vision in the macula lutea. And if we flip over to, and this is really, I know, getting a little ahead of the game, but if you flip over to, in the older book, page 377, and in the newer book, page 378, you'll see there a photograph of a retina. Okay? And I don't know, you may have had that done when you were having an eye exam. You're all probably too young for that yet. Have you ever had a retinal photograph? Okay, that's what it looks like. Now, you notice there a couple of areas. One is the macula lutea, all right, basically yellow spot, essentially. All right, and in the center of that macula lutea is where the fovea centralis is located, okay? And of course, if you have someone who's experiencing macular degeneration, well, it's involving the macula lutea, is the area that is undergoing the degeneration. All right, and of course, their central vision is not going to be as good. Well, that's primarily where central vision is formed. All right, now off to the side of that macula lutea, you see another area called the optic disc. All right? Well, the optic disc is an area where there are no photoreceptors. And we should be able to find the optic disc on our sheep eyes when we dissect them, because the optic disc is going to be on the retinal side And if you go back to the scleral side, that's where the optic nerve exits the eye. All right? It's in that very area. There are no photoreceptors on the optic disc, so therefore it's sometimes referred to as the blind spot. And we'll have a little exercise here later that demonstrates that. All right, so back to our diagram then on page 362 or 365. All right, so we found then the retina, the macula lutea, the fovea centralis, and there we go. Now, the optic nerve. Now, the optic nerve is not just nerve fibers, although that's the bulk of it. In the center of it are blood vessels. All right, so in the center of that is a central artery and vein that are either bringing blood into the eye or carrying the oxygenated blood out of the eye. Okay? And I think that pretty well gets most of it. All right, so let me see if I can reassemble this thing. And we'll see what we can do. Doesn't seem to want to hold together terribly well. Whoops. Terribly well, I'll tell you. Because we can get that lens to stay in place. And most uncooperative. Now, one thing about this particular model, you see the hole back here? Well, the lens wouldn't stay in place. Anyhow, supposedly you look through there, you can see where the image is, because that is essentially where the macula lutea would be. All right, I think the thing fell out, but you can pass around and try. I think this poor thing, I think the lens, yes, it disappeared eons ago. But you can take it apart and take a look at what's inside. Nonetheless, that feature I think we'll just have to forego. But when it comes to the image, if you move over to page 372 in the older book, the newer one, it's off the bottom of page 374. You notice that the way the image forms in the eye, it's inverted. It's inverted, okay? But of course the visual cortex turns it right side up, so we don't go around looking at everything upside down and backwards. All right, but in any event, that's the way the image forms. Now, I'm going to flip back. This is kind of back and forth, I know, but anyhow, yeah, you're all up to the task. If we go to figure 23.6, which in the older book is on page 366 and page 368 in the newer one, there is something that we've talked about before and we don't want to forget about, and that is, remember, the optic nerves coming from each eye. So there's a left optic nerve and a right optic nerve. All right, now, remember they meet at a point called the optic chiasma, right? And what happens there? Well, some of the fibers from each eye remain on the side. So, like if it's the left eye, some of the fibers stay on the left. Others cross to the right side. And with the right eye, it's just the opposite. Some of those fibers from the right optic nerve stay on the right. Some of them cross to the left at the optic chiasma. And then as we move posterior to the optic chiasma, we have the optic tracts. And the tracts contain fibers really from each eye. So the left optic tract contains fibers and thus impulses coming from both the left and the right eye, and the same would be true over there on the right side. And you can see in the diagram there how they're showing that, how the optic chiasma, some of the fibers cross, some of them don't, and end up going back to the visual cortex. And where in the brain was the visual cortex located? What's that lobe called? Starts with an O. Occipital, bless you. All right, so there we go. Now that's simple enough, isn't it? And of course, visual experiences can be remembered, just like other kinds of experiences, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Well, I think the time has come to meet and greet the eyes, so I'll get regaled and I'll ladle them out, and we'll get started with them. So let me stop this thing while we're going eyes, and then we'll bring it back when we get ready to